everybody. I welcome you all to this continued medical education webinar session hosted by RGUHS. Today's topic is pediatric COVID, recognizing and managing pediatric COVID-19. Without wasting much time, I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor to give his opening remarks. VC, sir.
Good afternoon, one and all. Again, we are starting this program of continued medical education program on the dot at 3 p.m. And today we have with us Dr. G.V. Baswaraj from Indira Gandhi Institute of Child Health, a pediatric consultant. And he'll be talking to us about pediatric COVID management. The scenario is, it is expected that we are going to vaccinate all the 18 to 44-year-old citizens, and we are left with those, population less than 18 years will not be vaccinated. So it is expected that if at all there is a third wave, it's going to affect pediatric age group more than anybody else. That's the reason we have to be prepared as to how we manage such a situation. So with that in mind, it becomes imperative, it becomes mandatory that we are, should not be taken off guard. We should be prepared for whatever we are going to face in the future. So that is what we are looking at. We have invited, I thank Dr. Baswaraj for accepting this invitation on behalf of RGUHS for delivering this lecture. This is a series of lectures that's being organized by Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, which are relevant, which are current, which are problems of today's what we face. So definitely it's going to help all the audience, all the participants who are joining this program day after day. And we are trying to get the best speakers, and with the most authentic information. We try to pass on the information to all the audience, be it a healthcare worker or doctors or allied health science people. It's going to be useful to each one of us who are connected with the COVID care work. So with this pursuit, RGUHS will continue to do this job. Like in the first wave also, we had continued medical education programs were organized continuously, and we would reach out to more than 2 lakh healthcare workers. So that is the wish. And without much ado, I would hand over the mic back to Dr. Mahendra to continue with the program, and the rest of the program can be organized. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Baswaraj?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Sachidananda sir. Sachidananda sir is my undergraduate teacher. That's where I did my MBBS from Bangalore Medical College. It is very fortunate to speak in front of our teacher, Professor Sachidananda sir. And once again, thank our Rajiv Gandhi University for doing an excellent job, especially organizing all the webinars, which is very relevant to the pandemic of COVID-19, and especially Dr. Dayanand, Dr. Mahendra, Dr. Rupa Shri Madam, and all the team of Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences. Dayanand sir, is the slides are visible?
Yes, sir.
Visible, sir. Yes, sir. Slides are visible.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you so much, Dr.
Yes, sir.
So before to discuss for the next 50 minutes is about how do we recognize the pediatric patient with COVID-19? What are the current trend in the management of a pediatric thing? Disclaimer, what I'm going to speak today may not be relevant for the next week because COVID-19 is a dynamic disease. Each day the things and scientific literature is changing. So what I'm going to speak is a national task force recommendation of Indian Academy of Pediatrics, WHO, UNICEF. We all sat together just April 25th of last month, where we discussed and we formed the guideline. On that basis, I'm going to talk for the next 50 minutes of my presentation. After that, we can take up a lot of gray area where it needs a lot of discussion. If you have any questions which is related to the pediatric thing or a COVID-19, you can put it in the chat box. At the end of presentation, we can take up. Before to the COVID-19 in the pediatric, let's look at the few glimpses up in a second wave. This is what the scenario across India, not only in Karnataka, across India, where the availability of oxygen bed is the major issue. Sometimes a single bed is occupied within 2 or 3 patients, where sometimes it is occupied in an ambulance. This is what the real scenario across India even today. When you look at the COVID-19 second wave, in the COVID-19 first wave, what we used to see per day around maximum of 1 lakh cases per day we used to see. But in second wave, it is like a tsunami where it did not give any time to act to all of us for an healthcare provider. Almost 4 to 4.5 lakhs cases, even now also 3 lakhs plus cases we have been reported across India. How second wave is in a different from that of in a first wave. When you look at in a second wave, a lot of mutational things has been noticed in the second wave. What we used to talk about a UK strain, we used to talk about a South African, Brazil, American strain, all those things. But coming to the second wave, what we have come across within a Maharashtra or Vidarbha strain, that is P1.617, what we used to say is the double mutation, or P1.618, what we used to say triple mutation. These are the things which is, of course, the latest one which has been reported by ICMR, that is N440K, that is a Kurnool strain. These are all the different strains, mutations, which is things which is happening. Professor Ravi, sir, in the last week, sir has very deliberately, in a detailed way, sir, has discussed these things. And second wave, one of the other differential thing is infectivity is more, spreads much faster. This is almost similar to the what we have seen it in the UK strain during the UK second wave, where the spread was enormous and the speed of spread was much more higher. When you compare to the first wave, in the second wave, we have come across with less than 45-year-old people used to get affected with these things. That's a common thing what we are. They're more vulnerable. Almost 60% of the COVID-19 cases in less than 45 years. Many are getting to moderate to severe cases. Older people are mainly remained in the indoor and getting vaccinated. That may be the other reason where the susceptible population is less than 45. Young people out for a business activity, that's where the social and the lowering down of a COVID appropriate behavior, that is resulted in all these things. Although mortality is still highest in older, but it is things has been noticed in a younger age group also. Other thing which is very unique with the second thing is, in the first wave, when you look at the population of a pediatric which is getting affected with the first wave is almost around 4 to 5%. That was the thing. What we are getting in the second wave is almost up to the 12% of the children is affected, depending, almost it varies from state to state. When Professor Ravi was discussing in the last presentation, sir was talking about in Karnataka around 10%. That is the thing. The next thing is why these children are getting more affected. One is a mutation is one of the reasons for it. So various mutations which is taking place, infectivity is more. Two, laxity on a part of the family where the COVID appropriate behavior has been lowered down. Symptoms almost same as that of in the first wave, but some of the things what we see it in the pediatric age group fever is lasting for a longer, especially in the adolescent. GIT manifestation which was there in the first wave also, but even you can see it in the second wave too. More and more children is getting admitted with the COVID, requiring an oxygen and NIV support. Where when I interacted with across India, so where in Delhi, Maharashtra and all those places where the previously we used to isolate the patient for a co-infection, but now the COVID infection per se is causing an admission. That is what the concern, that is why the third wave where we need to be prepared. The second wave, what we have noticed, another thing, when you talk about incubation period is 2 days to 14 days, that is the common thing. But in the because of a mutation and lot of other strains which is appearing, the incubation period appears to be reduced in the second wave, where symptoms are appearing early and sometimes where there is no fever, but the dyspnea and progression of an then okay, sorry for technical things. There was some technical issues which were there. So now I am audible.
Yes, sir. It is clear, sir.
Okay, thank you. So how the second wave is different is a lesser incubation period and rapid progression of any symptoms. Symptoms appear early. Even sometimes there is not much of a fever, only the breathing difficulty and progression into the severe disease. And oxygen requirement, we all facing it. Almost requirement of oxygen is going dramatically very high in the second wave. These are some of the things how it is different from that of a first wave. With this background, let's move to the topic proper. Now, what we are going to discuss in this session, which is related to the pediatric epidemiology and clinical presentation of a COVID-19, when and how to test for a COVID-19, how to manage a COVID-19 children depending upon the severity. If it is an asymptomatic, how do we manage? If it is mild, how to manage it? Moderate and severe and critical. We'll discuss the with the case examples of a case. Diagnosis and management of a MIS-C. MIS-C is one of the things which is very unique to the pediatric population. That doesn't mean that it will not occur in an adults. Even the younger adults also, MIS-C is one of the presentation we are all started seeing it. COVID-19 and in relation to the newborn, what should be the protocol, how we need to, as a pediatrician, we need to gear up. Prevention of a COVID-19, basically biological vaccine and so social things. We'll try to discuss that in the question and answer session. I'll not go to the touch upon the vaccine because one of the session was there on vaccine. Children's and the second wave, the increased number of infection in the children, basically children started going out because of the no cases, almost negligible cases from September to the February, even up to the March, where the lot of movement of the things has taken place. Transmission from the adult. This is one thing. Previously in the first wave, what we see is only 1 or 2 family members is affected. Now, if you ask the things, any family, almost attack rate in the family is almost 100% attack rate, where the infection prevention control measures is then a laxity of that really led to these things. This is a known thing as the pandemic is moving towards either epidemic or endemicity. These are the things which is likely to happen. More infectious variant viruses, that is the mutation things I have already discussed that. Increased severity of the infection even in the children. Previously, we used to think about only co-infection. Now the COVID per se is causing a disease process. We'll discuss as the presentation progresses. More fever and GI manifestation. Prolonged fever, that's one of the things which we need to spend some time on prolonged fever. I'll be doing that in my presentation. COVID pneumonia and hypoxia, especially the 2 age categories, we need to be very careful. One is an adolescent, second population is less than 1 year. These are the 2 population where COVID pneumonia is the one thing. That's what the across India, where these are the 2 population which is more likely to be affected. Apart from that, comorbidity. MIS-C, which we have reported in the April 2020 by UK, subsequently in India and also across Karnataka, that is started appearing. This is where the role of pediatrician really is a major role. But in spite of all these things, diseases in children, still it is a milder as compared to the adults. Only 1 to 2% of the children in the pediatric population requires an hospitalization. That's a good thing about, we are all fortunate about that. It is not that. Next clinical question of mine is which question as a clinician. So this is where the lot of dilemma which comes in the into play. At this point of time, where the almost this disease is community spread is taken place, any acute illness coming into a clinical practice, whether it is a children and adult, we need to think about a COVID-19. So that's the thing. Symptoms in the children which are non-specific, like any other viral illness. So one of the things which is really going to be useful in the clinical practice is history of a COVID-19 contact or in the surrounding members in the family. That's the one thing which is helpful. Fever and sore throat, cough, malaise and fatigue, breathlessness. These are some of the things either alone or in combination you can get it, these things. Loss of taste and smell, this is not a common thing in the pediatric age group, but if at all, if you're thinking about loss of taste, especially child more than 8 years, that is the time where you can get an history of that. In infancy, one of the important thing in a young infant is child is irritable, not taking the feeding, lethargy. This is the time where you can think about GI manifestation like a diarrhea, vomiting, and abdominal pain. This is another thing where we should. Dermatological manifestation like an maculopapular rashes, petechiae. These are the things, dermatological things. Sometimes gangrene of the finger and toes, which has been reported, but not very common in a rare some of the case report. Drowsiness is another thing. Asymptomatic close or household contact with the COVID-19, it's a very good, important history in the clinical practice as the child appearance of the symptoms and all. That is the time which is going to be very, very useful. Testing of a suspect, how do we test the suspect thing? Let's understand this thing. So whom to test? Ideally, where we suspect a patient with COVID-19, that is the time where you can think about we have to do the testing. But due to the enormous load on the lab, prolonged test around time, which may be deferred to do it in a mild symptoms and in asymptomatic things, that is the time where you can avoid it. Otherwise, if there is a comorbidity, known contact, those are the patients we should not miss. For infection prevention and control measures before any procedure and hospitalization, that's the time where we need to do a testing for a COVID-19. So comorbidity, the moment we talk about a comorbidity, which may indicate the high risk for the severe disease apart from the infancy and an adolescent, what are the other comorbidity? One of the things in a COVID management is a risk stratification. Once if you as a clinician, if you are able to classify the risk, categorization of risk, that really which is helpful in the clinical practice. So comorbidity is like a chronic kidney disease. It could be nephrotic syndrome. It could be chronic renal failure. That's the time where you need to be little careful. CHD, especially in younger age group, where you commonly get it in a congenital heart disease. In the older, RHD, lung disease, chronic lung disorder. Diabetes is a comorbidity which is in adults as well as in children too. Neurodisability, obesity, it is a risk factor both in adults as well as in children. Any underlying malignancy or any immunosuppressive condition, we need to be more careful. Severe malnutrition, these are some of the risk factor where we should be more aggressive in the testing as well as in monitoring the patient, child. So how do we interpret? This is one of the important diagram which is helps in which are the specimen which is going to be useful in the clinical practice. How do we interpret the test? What are the tests which is going to be useful? And depending upon the stage of the disease, we all know stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 disease as well as incubation period. What we are seeing, this is an incubation period where most of the child will be asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic period. Just 1 to 2 days before the onset of symptom, the child can be positive during this time. So that is 2 to 14 days. In an average, you can say it is 5 days, even much lesser with the present mutation of the things. What we are interested as a clinician, this is the stage 1. This is in a viremic phase where majority of the time, the moment you say viremic phase, the specimens here, what is going to be useful is your respiratory specimen. I'll come to that sensitivity pattern of respiratory specimen. It could be in a bronchoalveolar lavage, it could be a sputum. Both the things are not possible. What is possible is oropharyngeal or nasopharyngeal or combination of nasopharyngeal, oropharyngeal things. So usually if you take a bronchoalveolar lavage, which is more in an intensive care setting where 95% of the sensitivity, other respiratory specimen like in nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal combination is around 70% of the time it is sensitive. So where you can do it in the first week of the illness. Whereas what you're seeing is in a stool, that was the thing in a yellow color. This was the things we used to do it in the first wave, not much utility in the clinical practice. So carryover message is your respiratory specimen in the first week. What about antibodies? Antibodies, when you're looking at what you're seeing is in a purple color is an IgM antibody. Any viral infection antibody usually appears on 4 to 6 days. IgM antibody usually it appears. It peaks around 2 weeks, then it comes down. Whereas IgG antibody, it is in a one thing which appears on in the second week and peaks around 2 to 3 weeks and persists for longer period, protective for an around 6 months. That's what the present literature. It could be varies from stage to stage. That's an IgG antibody which is relevant for your protection. So overall carry home message, when you look at this graph, your PCR report can be positive as late as up to 3 months. That's why, so repeat PCR is not really indicated. That's what ICMR guidelines, which has been published in May 4th, is also clearly with that. But there are special situations where you need to do. I'll come to that with the examples of a case. Next thing comes once you decide to choose which specimen you need to test it. Next thing is, when do we test and which test to be done? This is one of the things we need to understand as a clinician. The question comes, when should we test? The moment the symptom appears, we need to do the testing. That is one. When it comes to the testing, which are the tests which is useful in the clinical practice? Viral culture, it is only for the only for the research purpose. It is not possible in day-to-day practice. We'll forget about viral culture. What is most easily available test? We'll start from that. Rapid antigen test is one thing. When you look at the screening test, we need a good sensitivity test, but rapid antigen test is one thing. It all depends upon the type of kit you are going to use it in. Sensitivity, it is much lesser than the RT-PCR. It is around 20 to 40%. You can say around 30%. Specimens you are going to test with a rapid antigen test is a nasopharyngeal or naso-oropharyngeal combination. That means respiratory secretion. Advantages of rapid antigen test is it is a quick turnaround time, very quick. You can within 15 minutes you can do it. Even you can do it in your OPD, emergency, and it is very useful thing to segregation of a patient. It is a very cheap, almost it costs around 250 to 300 or 400 rupees, depending upon the availability, and company also matters. Less sensitive, as I said already, but once the rapid antigen test is positive, that means no need to do the RT-PCR because it is a very good specificity of 99.9%. That means no need to confirm with RT-PCR. If the rapid antigen test is positive, that means it is the patient is a COVID-19. Next test which we can use it in the clinical practice is an RT-PCR and a TrueNat or GeneXpert. These are all the PCR-based tests where the nucleic acid amplification is the thing which is the gold standard, most accepted across the world, even by ICMR. It is the gold standard, around 70% of the sensitivity. Still around 30% of the children may be negative. COVID-19 patient may be negative. What is the difference between the RT-PCR and TrueNat? When your volume of the load in your hospital is much more, that's the time where your RT-PCR is going to be the handy. If the volume of the patient is less, like in a primary healthcare center or a community healthcare center, where the TrueNat is the one thing which really it is going to be very useful because it does not require too much of expertise. One. Two, you can turnaround time will be very less. Within 1 to 2 hours, you can get the report. That's why TrueNat is one thing which is very useful in the primary healthcare center or a community health center. That's the thing. If it is in a bigger hospital where your turnaround and the patient load is much higher, where you require an RT-PCR, so that's the place where you can do. The only thing disadvantage with an RT-PCR, it requires a lot of technical expert. That is one. Two, cost is little bit higher, but investment cost is much higher. Three, and turnaround time is little bit longer than what it was for a TrueNat. So that is why it cannot be done in smaller places. COVID-19 antibody, in the clinical practice, antibody is a no role, but there are two exceptions to this. One, in the pediatric age group, if you're thinking about a multi-system inflammatory syndrome, that's the time where your COVID antibodies, IgG antibody is a useful thing. So that is the time where you can do an IgG antibody. Other situation where your antibody role comes into the play is seroprevalence study. That is more of an epidemiological aspect. As a clinician's perspective, only in a case of multisystem inflammatory syndrome, that's where otherwise routinely don't do the antibody test. So when you are interpreting that, whether it is an antigen or an RT-PCR, always make it a point, the clinical context in which you are interfering, that's more important in the clinical practice. So let's look at the other things in the diagnostic algorithm. What is the way in this pandemic? If you are doing an antigen test in the nasopharyngeal swab, if it becomes in a positive, that confirms the diagnosis of COVID-19. If it is negative, what is the way ahead? We need to go for an RT-PCR or TrueNet. So if it is positive, that confirms your diagnosis. If it is RT-PCR is negative, if you are still suspecting of a strangling thing, so manage clinically, rule out other illness. That's more important. Don't think about all the time it's a COVID-19. So it could be something else too. And repeat RT-PCR if available freely, you can do that. But with the present pandemic, so much workload on the lab, we need to use the RT-PCR in a judicious way. If the patient is having a respiratory symptom, especially in adolescents or young adults, that's the time where we, if the respiratory symptoms with respiratory distress, with hypoxia, that is the situation where you can use a CT scan. I'll come to that, how judiciously you can use it. It should not be misused. What about role of CT chest in the children with COVID-19? Is a CT chest is more sensitive than the chest X-ray. We all know that. But only thing cost is around 1,500 to 2,000. That is the thing where government of Karnataka is fixed around 1,500. It requires a need for an sedation, radiation exposure. Even though whatever the technology you use, it is much more than your chest X-ray. You need to remember, I'll not go into the nitty-gritties of any technical issues of radiation exposure. Where it is not indicated. This is very important for a clinician's point of view. If there is a mild disease, don't advise the CT scan. If there is a prolonged fever without any lower respiratory tract involvement or without respiratory symptoms, in a suspected case of a COVID-19, can I use it? Answer is no need to use it. This is where some of the time where the misuse can take place. For moderate and severe disease, which is already RT-PCR is positive, can I do a CT scan? Answer is no. If the already diagnosis is done, unless you are anticipating some complication, generally, even if it is a severe disease, no role for a CT. That's what we need to remember. Where we can use it judiciously, this CT scan. If the clinical suspect of a COVID-19 with a protracted symptom, but negative RT-PCR, you have done an RT-PCR, so you are suspecting clinically and a lot of respiratory complaints, yes, you can go ahead with your CT scan. That's the time where you can use it. In the pediatric, utility is very less. Acutely sick child with a breathless need to determine the cause of illness. Triaging is needed. This is a very important in an emergency perspective, not in the routine aspect. Known severe COVID-19 with the deterioration where you are expecting some pneumothorax, some other complication. That is the time where your CT scan becomes handy. The message, what I'm going to convey this slide is the use of CT scan in the pediatric practice is very minimal. If at all, if you use it, very judiciously used in about what I discussed it already. Once you're done in a CT scan or a chest X-ray, what are the changes you're going to see? So generally, especially in adolescent kids, that's what we are seeing is ARDS is one of the things across India. When I discussing with an intensivist in Mumbai, Delhi, Jaipur, and Hyderabad, what we are seeing is a lot of things in an adolescent. This is where your CT scan and chest X-ray is going to be useful in a case of a suspected. These are all the non-specific changes. What you are seeing is a non-specific subpleural changes. There is nothing specific to COVID-19. Let's discuss about the classification of a disease. The classification of a disease both by Government of India, even Indian Academy of Pediatrics, WHO, and ICMR. Almost all are synchronized with the same definition: mild, moderate, severe, and critical. These are the definitions which has been accepted by all the bodies. In the mild disease, what we see is generally fever, sore throat, rhinorrhea, and cough and GI manifestation. Basically, it is a case of a no pneumonia, so no past breathing. That's a mild disease. Moderate disease is the one where there is a tachypnea, age appropriate. Suppose if the age of the child less than 2 months, 60 and above, 2 months to 12 months, 50 and above, 12 months to that of 5 years, with 40 and above, beyond that 30. So basically here is a moderate disease is an hypoxia, similar to that of an adult. Only thing age appropriate tachypnea respiratory rate, you need to define this SpO2 is 90 to 94. No signs of a severe disease here. When there is a severe disease where the pneumonia with the saturation is less than 90%, with increased tachypnea, we are all aware about integrated management of a neonatal childhood illness, where general danger signs is lethargy, convulsion, and inability to take the feed, persistent vomiting. That's any general danger signs present that fits into a severe disease. Critical disease is the one where full-blown case of an ARDS, multi-organ involvement, shock, and acute thrombotic hit. So that's the time where you say it is a critical disease. So these are once you categorize the disease, the next thing comes as a practicing pediatrician or healthcare provider. How do we manage these things? Let's take up. Yesterday we had a very beautiful, one of the wonderful class yesterday regarding how do we isolate the things in the home and all. Let's look at these things in the pediatric, how slightly it is different from that. It is an asymptomatic child is in one where we need to isolate in the home. So we should determine is it in a pre-symptomatic, asymptomatic and post-symptomatic stage. That's the one thing we need to. History of a prior illness, that's another thing which is going to be useful, or contact. CT value, cycle threshold. When you get in a PCR report, most of the time you'll get in a CT value. As a clinician, how the CT value is going to, I'll not go into the detail of a CT value, but as a clinical perspective, let's understand CT value. If the higher the CT value, what does it indicate? Lower the threshold, lower viral replication. If the lower the CT value, there will be higher viral load. How it is going to be important? Is it going to be useful as a predicting the disease? Answer is no. Why answer is no? The day in which you collected the specimen, the way you collected the specimen, the site you collected the specimen, the way you transported the specimen in a viral transport, that is VTM, and the method in which you are doing it. And most importantly, there is no standardization to predict the thing. That means it is not going to predict the severity of the disease. As a clinician's perspective, how it is going to be useful? What it can say CT value is, okay, if the CT value is low, viral load is more, it is more likely to transmit. In that aspect, you can interpret. So that will do. In a asymptomatic child, do you want any intervention? Answer is no need to intervene. Isolation, should we isolate with the parent, or how do we isolate? Preferably, you can isolate with the parent. That's the important thing. So I'll come to that isolation issues in the next slide. What's the development of a symptom? This is more important. Most of the time, the virus enters the body. Usually 5 days later, most of the time, the clinical symptoms will appear. But you need to observe the child for 10 days for the symptom. If the asymptomatic child, if you have done it during the surgery and procedure, that may be delayed. That's the time where you can do these COVID things. Guidelines for isolation: infected children to be isolated preferably with the parent, unless the parent is having any comorbidity like a diabetes and other obesity and other things. Preferably you can isolate with the parent. The word of caution here is the parents who are giving any care to the child, what they need to do is they should take it, you wear a mask, preferably N95 or triple layer mask, maintain a distance with the child, and sanitization. And sanitization is another thing which is important. So avoid high risk parents. If the parents is positive, child is also been isolated with them, so there is no issue with that. Should not be sent to the grandparent. This is more important when you are advising the things as a pediatrician or healthcare provider. So make sure that grandparents are a high risk category where they should not child most of the time it is likely to go with the grandparent. This is where you should separate from, especially including the toilet, bathroom, everything needs to be separated for the isolation. Negative PCR does not rule out infection. They may be in the incubation period. That's why negative does not guarantee. Even 30% of the patient still can be, in spite of the COVID infection, still
Gautam, is there a problem?
Yes, sir. We see some technical issues, sir, from the side.
It can be negative. If the asymptomatic yeah, let me share one call was there. That is why it does this one. So can you able to see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, thank you. So straight away go to the management of a mild COVID. This is where I was there. So in a mild is a one where there is a no clinical features of lower respiratory tract involvement. The non-specific symptoms like a fever, cold, cough, acute this sore throat. These are the things without any respiratory distress and without any organ dysfunction. So this is where your symptomatic care. The moment we talk about symptomatic care is an antipyretic. Most of the time they will be having a fever. The moment we say paracetamol, it is in the dose of 10 to 15 milligram per kg per dose. You can give it 6 hourly. Preferably, you need to avoid other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, mefenamic acid. They have a renal and liver complication, better to be avoided. If there is a nasal stuffiness and all, you can use a decongestant. Sometimes you may need to require a cough syrup, antitussive. This is just a symptomatic treatment. So that is not more important. What is most important is you need to look for things like, for example, zinc, vitamin C and D. Is there any role for zinc and vitamin D and all? Answer is there is no established scientific evidence to give a zinc, vitamin C and vitamin D, but can be given. That's one thing. Steam inhalation, not really required. No role for antiviral. This is the one important thing, especially azithromycin. Is there any role of azithromycin? Most of the time we used to talk about in the first wave, it is an antiviral, immunomodulatory, and so anti-inflammatory, all those things. The question here is, there is no role of azithromycin. Use azithromycin in only two situations. If you're suspecting atypical pneumonia, that is mycoplasma pneumonia, or chlamydia pneumonia in younger children, that is the time where you can use azithromycin. Role for azithromycin is COVID-19, proven behind the doubt. Even all the international organization, even our national task force does not recommend azithromycin. What about doxycycline? There is no role of a doxycycline in a COVID-19, even especially in the children. You can use a doxycycline if there is a co-infection with rickettsial fever. Otherwise, role of doxycycline in COVID-19, no role. What about ivermectin? In pediatric age group, I'll not touch upon the adult thing, controversial things I'll not touch. In pediatric, whether you take a Government of India guideline, take an IAP guideline, take an WHO, any guidelines, CDC, there is no role of ivermectin, whether it is a prophylactic, whether it's a mild and moderate disease, absolutely no role of ivermectin, even though we talk about high dose of an ivermectin can be a preventive about a severe disease, mild, moderate, AIMS, Bhubaneswar study, all those things we are talking, still there is no recommendation for ivermectin. What about favipiravir? Favipiravir is the one drug which has been used in the adult physician, but coming to the pediatric, so there, even though it is an antiviral drug, there is no proven benefit of using a favipiravir in a pediatric. The message is very clear, no role for either azithro, doxy, ivermectin and favipiravir in the clinical practice. It is not moving.
Hello.
Yeah, something. Slides were not moving. Can you see the slides?
You can
Yes.
see. You can see.
We can see the slides.
Mahendra sir, why it is not moving? I don't know.
Stop and again share it, sir.
Yeah, again I'll share it. Okay. Mild disease. We were there here. Yeah, this is. Can you see the slide, sir?
We can see the slide now.
We can see.
Why it is not?
Sir, go back and next slide you put it, sir.
Next slide. Okay.
Yeah, go back and
Basuraj sir, kindly go to the slide sorter and go to the next slide.
Slide alter. Okay. 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 Can you able to see the slides?
Yeah.
Yes, we can see.
Yes, Basu.
Okay.
Go ahead like this only, sir, because full screen apparently your slides are not moving. So go like this only.
Okay. So management of a mild disease, we were discussing about. So there is no role of an antiviral drugs. That is what I discussed about azithromycin and ivermectin and favipiravir. Data about inhaled budesonide. This is what the Government of India guidelines in the last week, which came out with the role of an adult. When you look at an budesonide, especially if the fever and cough persisting for more than 5 days in a mild to moderate disease, where you can use an budesonide in 800 microgram. If to extrapolate the same data into the period, especially in adolescent, you can. What about role of a systemic steroid? There is no role of a systemic steroid in a mild COVID-19. So let's understand, is there any role of an investigation? In the case of a mild disease, we should not do any investigation like a CBC or acute phase reactant like a CRP, D-dimer, CT chest. This is the one thing where the most of the time it is misused in the clinical practice. We need to avoid these things. What is most relevant in the clinical practice is monitoring the red flag sign. This is what we need to focus in the as a healthcare provider. This is where if the child continues to have an high-grade fever, that's a red flag sign. If the child continues to have a fever for more than 5 days, if the child is having a very high-grade fever with the chills and dry gut, that's a danger sign. We need to be more cautious. If there is a biphasic fever, that is very, very important, similar to that of an adult. High-grade fever or prolonged fever or biphasic fever, we need to be more cautious things. If the child is lethargic and poor feeding in the infant and rapid breathing, this is where we need to tell the parents to come back before sending the child, or if there is a home isolation, these are the things which you need to be cautious. Older children monitor the oxygen saturation, especially in adolescent. Monitoring the saturation is plays an important role. Parents have to be told how to monitor the saturation regarding highest reading and good trace of a curve, not during the fever and sleep. That is the time where they should not measure the things. Children with a serious comorbidity and mild COVID-19, this requires an intensive monitoring at the home if there is no beds are available. If the beds are available in the hospital, we need to admit to the hospital, given healthcare professional, and healthcare should be given. What about role of a convalescent plasma? Most of the time we used to talk about a plasma in the early phase of the disease. The ICMR guidelines, Government of India guidelines, even the clinical guidelines across internationally clearly say no role for convalescent plasma, whether it's a pediatric and the things. Remdesivir in a very immunocompromised child, especially in a chemotherapy child is on chemotherapy transplant, that is the time judiciously you can use even in a mild disease, but it is on case-to-case basis, not as a guidelines. That's what we need to. What about role of Regeneron? This is a monoclonal antibody. This is which has been approved in the FDA in the US for more than 12 years. This may be the one of the things, especially in the immunocompromised child, not in a regular practice. Very special circumstances where you can think about Regeneron or a cocktail monoclonal antibody. What about the children with a prolonged fever? This is one thing where we have to be very, very alert. These are the patients at any point of time can deteriorate. Children with high-grade fever lasting for more than 4 to 5 days. What does it indicate? It is basically indicate the cytokine storm. In here, the investigation is very much required. CBC with absolute lymphocyte count is one routine thing. CRP, malarial parasite, blood culture, chest X-ray, you can do it. Other tests like a dengue serology, these are the things which is going to be very useful. Ultrasound and echocardiography if you're suspecting a MIS-C. I'll discuss the MIS-C separately. CT chest is not required. No role of antibiotic unless you're suspecting a bacterial infection. Otherwise, we'll be more towards this one. What it requires a close monitoring. Should give a remdesivir in things. Answer is not recommended by IAP as well as Government of India guidelines. Even WHO, it is not recommended thing. Steroid should be avoided. Steroid is the one thing which is lot of misuse which is taking place. Unless there is an hypoxia and all, you no need to give just for the sake of a fever in the pediatric practice. Once after discussing the mild COVID and asymptomatic COVID, let's discuss about the moderate COVID. Moderate COVID is the one where the tachypnea, age appropriate, I have already discussed that, I will not go into that. Saturation here is a 90 to 95% at the room air. Admission to the isolation ward or a critical care unit is very much required, and HDU facilities if it is available. This is the child, yes, we need to do an investigation like CBC and acute phase reactant, LFT and RFT, chest X-ray, yes. If the saturation is above 94%, just monitor with the paracetamol. Good hydration is the key. Antibiotic if you are suspecting only co-infection, otherwise no. So if the saturation is less than 94%, that's the time we need to give an oxygen in the form of either you can give a nasal mask or you can use a face mask or a non-rebreathing mask. And most important, if the severe hypoxia, if it is still persisting, you can go with the humidified high flow nasal cannula. That's the one thing which is going to be useful. What about steroid? In a moderate disease, not in all, on case-to-case basis with hypoxia, that is the time where you can use a dexamethasone in the dose of 0.15 milligram. Since it is a moderate disease, once daily is good enough, maximum of 6 milligram. Or if you are using a methylprednisolone, you can use 1 to 2 milligram per kg. You should not use a higher dose of methylprednisolone in a case of even moderate or severe. I'll come to the severe. If you are using a methylprednisolone, lung penetration is better, anti-inflammatory activity is much better. You can use 1 milligram per kg. Don't use a pulse methylprednisolone. What about remdesivir? Remdesivir is not recommended even in a moderate disease. On case-to-case basis, if there is a comorbidity, that is the time where emergency authorization to use, which has been approved by CDC and also in the Government of India guideline, which mentions about emergency authorization to use, but it is not for a blanket treatment of a remdesivir. So I'll not go to that remdesivir. I'll come in the severe things. Severe COVID in children, respiratory or the other severe organ manifestation. If there is an involvement, definitely it requires an intensive care unit. You need to go with the investigation, CBC and acute phase reactant, ABG, lactate, ECG, echocardiography is also an important thing. Oxygen and ventilatory support. This is the time where which is important. Here dexamethasone, if you are using it, is a 0.15 milligram. In moderate disease, I said it is OD. In a case of a severe disease, it's the 0.15 milligram, maximum 6 milligram BD, or methylprednisolone 1 to 2 milligram per kg can be used. Remdesivir, yes, if it is a severe hypoxia, this is the time where you can use the remdesivir. CDC is given a permission to use it, emergency authorization to use if the weight of the child is more than 3.5 kg on case-to-case basis, not as a routine recommendation. That's about remdesivir. So you can start with a 5 milligram per kg start, followed by 2.5 milligram for next 4 days. Or if you are using, if the weight of the child is more than 40 kg, you can use a 200 on first day. Subsequently, you can use an 100 mg OD for 4 days. What about tocilizumab and bercitinib and other things? It is not been much useful in the pediatric at the present available literature. We don't know, the things may change over a period of time. Not much really useful. Antimicrobials, only if you're suspecting a secondary bacterial infection, that is the time where you can give it. So you watch for the deterioration, especially progression, pneumothorax, myocarditis. These are the things which can happen. You need to be watching. With this clinical background, let's go through some of the cases. Let's understand what are the clinical, as a clinician, what are the difficulties you facing. This is a 15-year-old obese adult child of 80 kg. Parents were tested for COVID-19 10 days ago. This child is coming with a fever, cough for 4 to 5 days, become a breathlessness on day 6. On examination, it is febrile, tachypnea, saturation is 90% at the room air, bilateral crepitation, RT-PCR was sent in from the emergency department. So when you look at these things with history of a COVID-19 in the family, presence of a fever, cough, with the breathing difficulty, with the low saturation, definitely we need to think about COVID-19, severe COVID. So the things question needs to be answered here is, should we admit this child? And if you are admitting, where to admit? That is the thing which is definitely this is in a COVID-19 suspect. It needs to be in the isolation emergency department where rapid antigen can be done quickly. Positive, you can turn it to the COVID ICU. So these are the things each hospital differs from hospital to hospital, but it needs to be admitted into the ICU. What investigation needs to be answered? That I'll come to that. Respiratory support, how we are going to give it. What are the drugs? What about the guidelines for the remdesivir, steroid, low molecular weight heparin, tocilizumab, convalescent plasma? We'll discuss one by one. Admission, it is requires isolation critical care unit. Your whole purpose in this patient is to maintain the good saturation of 92 to 94. You can start with a non-breathing mask. It is less than 90%. So you can start with a non-breathing mask. When you're delivering oxygen through the non-breathing mask, you should remember, you should deliver around 10 liters of oxygen. What about investigation? Apart from routine investigation, CBC, acute phase reactant like CRP, D-dimer and ferritin, we need to get the liver function, renal function test. Blood culture is other thing which is required. What about low molecular weight? This is the patient which requires a low molecular weight of a 40 units you can start with, and OD you can give it subcutaneously initially. No role for an antibiotic unless you are thinking about a co-infection. Otherwise, antibiotics is not required. You should not misuse the antibiotic. What about steroid? This is a child which is adolescent, which is requiring an hypoxia, requiring a lot of oxygen. Yes, we need to start an steroid. Dexamethasone, you can start with a 0.15 milligram BD or methylprednisolone, whichever the steroid which is available in your hospital, you can go ahead with. What about remdesivir? Even though we talk about a controversial thing in the children, since it is the age of the child is 15 years, already hypoxic, and the day 6 or day 7 of illness, yes, this is the patient which is a fit patient for an remdesivir. You can start with a 200 milligram followed by 100 milligram because 80 kg, the patient weight is 80 kg. Is there any role of tocilizumab convalescent plasma? Absolutely no role for convalescent plasma. Tocilizumab, since it is a 15 years, where if the IL-6 and all is high, during that time you can consider on case-to-case basis, not in a routine recommendation. So what are the discussion point and carry home message in this? Risk of progression is much higher in an adolescent and with comorbidity. This is the child which is having in a comorbidity of obesity and adolescent, where the inflammatory cytokine storm is much more higher. Cytokine storm is much higher. We need to be very, very careful when you're dealing with an adolescent and then obesity. Because what as a pediatrician is going to see a next wave or in the present wave is, especially between 12 to 19 years, that is where your pediatrician's role comes into the major play. These are the patients which can almost behave like adult. That's why we should be geared up for that, handling that. Need for careful monitoring of oxygenation is the key. We need to continuously monitor the SpO2. Lab parameter, when you're interpreting, you should always look into the clinical context and interpret. Don't interpret the lab or individual lab. You look at the whole case and all the lab parameter, interpret that within a holistic way. In a patient who continues to have a fever after the drop in saturation, dexamethasone and stopgap admission may be possible. Logistics, especially admitting the young children and older children with an adolescent, that needs a special thing. We need to be prepared for that. Let's move to the case 2. This is an 8-month-old child with a fever, vomiting, loose stools for 2 days, cough and hurried breathing and refusal of feeding for 1 day. Treated initially with a paracetamol, history of a COVID-19 positive status in the father and maternal uncle. At present, patient child is tachypneic, tachycardic, sick looking, some signs of a dehydration. When you look into the saturation is 88%, there is an history of a COVID contact. So in spite of giving an oxygen 92. So that means it is definitely it is a severe COVID. We have to treat like a COVID thing. Rapid antigen test was negative. This is the child section. Look at that 8-month-old, typical ARDS like presentation. This is the thing. The priority in this child management priorities is, once since the acute G is there, your priority is to correct the hydration, dehydration, so that you maintain a good hydration status. Persistence of a distressed child who is on which is definitely it requires an HFNC. So nasal cannula may not be sufficient. Immediately shift it to the humidified high flow nasal cannula. Basically, by the time stabilizing this investigation came, look at that leukocytosis with the platelet count and CRP is also marginally elevated. So this, meanwhile, the report of nasopharyngeal swab RT-PCR came, which is positive. Look at this investigation of an acute phase reactant was also sent because it is fitting into the severe category. Look at the ferritin is very high in 1,000. LDH is also marginal, not much. Troponin, look at that D dimer, and IL-6 is very high. So this child definitely needs to be admitted into the critical care unit, preferably with the mother, and continued with an HFNC. Steroid is in a one thing. The next question comes, this is an 8-month-old child. You look at the D-dimer and all, but this child is presented with a respiratory. So even though your investigation pointing towards a MIS-C, the investigation more pointing towards an severe disease, you start with the remdesivir and steroid. This one, if the child improves, monitor the acute phase reactant all. If the child does not improve, then I'll come to that. What are the other things, clinical questions which needs to be answered? This child luckily was managed with remdesivir for 5 days and parenteral steroid for 3 days, later converted into oral. Loose stools and all subsided. Inflammatory markers showed decreasing trend. Weaned from HFNC and nasal cannula. Oxygen requirement gradually on 9th day. Oxygen support symptomatically better. Discharged on 10th day of hospitalization. Discussion point as a clinician, as we are going to get in a lot of cases like this, how we need to be. Beware about an infant with especially with a respiratory symptom, where less than 1-year-old child known to progress much faster, especially within a presence of a CHD and other comorbidity. We need to be much more vigilant. 2, do we do a 2-day echo in a less than 1 year, especially if the fever is prolonged? If there is another thing, yes, we need to, because coronary abnormality, this is the patient where echo is very much required. That means when you are preparing for the 3rd wave, we need to look at that ultrasound echocardiography is then a part and parcel of a level 3 intensive care unit, even in emergency department and PICU, where it is going to play a role. What about immunoglobulin? Immunoglobulin, see, we need, even though it is not fitting into the scientifically into the MIS-C, but severe COVID with these things in less than 1 year, we don't know. At the moment, the literature is lacking to advising in a severe COVID with IV immunoglobulin on individual basis. We need to consider on this. This is not the guidelines. That's why I'm just putting a question mark on that. So MIS-C, your immunoglobulin is yes. For a severe COVID, we need to think it on case-to-case basis, especially in less than 1 year. We can consider that because it is likely to affect the coronary abnormality. That is where it is likely to be a long morbidity and lot of economical issues over a period of next 50 to 60 years. That will be burden to the society. We need to look all those things into the things. Let's go to the another case. It is a case number 3. This is a different context. This is what we are going to face as a pediatrician. This is a 7-year-old boy, known case of an infrequent nephrotic syndrome, facial puffiness, decreased urine output for 2 days, fever, cold, no pulse, absolutely asymptomatic. Patient came for a nephrotic syndrome in your hospital. How you are going to do that? So this child is having a blood pressure is high of 95th centile. Mother is known was a positive for COVID-19. That is the reason child was sent. Child is also a positive. Next question comes, how will you manage this type of a child? Should we treat a COVID-19 or should we treat a nephrotic syndrome? Child is totally asymptomatic. What should be your thing? First and foremost priority is to observe the child. That is most important rather than treating the things. Look for the symptoms, especially on day 4, day 5. Observe the child, isolate for 10 days. That's more important. Next thing, when do you start the steroid? If the child becomes asymptomatic, do you start the steroid? Answer is, ideally you should have a negative swab. This is where the repeat PCR is the one thing which comes in handy. Just I gave a nephrotic syndrome as an example. It could be a case of an ALL, planning for a chemotherapy. It could be in some other condition where you are planning for immunosuppressive therapy or immunocompromised children. All these things comes into these things. These are the guidelines. It's going to evolve over a period of time. But whatever the literature which is available, we need to stick to that at the moment. Let's look at another clinical case. This is a 7-year-old boy, high-grade fever with conjunctival congestion, with rash, and treated with an antipyretic. Fever is persisted. No history of a COVID-19 or a contact with the COVID-19, febrile, tachycardic, saturation is well maintained, no murmur, liver is not. Any child which in this present pandemic, if it is coming with an involvement of a mucous membrane, like especially conjunctival suffusion or any mucosal involvement with a skin involvement with high grade fever and toxic, think about multisystem inflammatory syndrome, because it is a very, very important condition. If you intervene early, your results is much better. Any child with a fever of more than 3 days in the pandemic or epidemic, we need to think about, especially with the multi-system involvement like in a GIT, mucocutaneous, neurological or cardiac thing, treat as a medical emergency and rule out the COVID-19 other infection, follow the systematic method for diagnosis, the thing. When you look at the phenotypic presentation of a multi-system inflammatory syndrome, this itself is a separate class. Just I'll touch up on the thing. Kawasaki-like presentation is the one thing we are all aware, especially two mucus involvement, two cutaneous involvement, one lymph node involvement. That is very typical of Kawasaki disease, mucocutaneous lymph node syndrome. Another is a toxic shock syndrome where the blood pressure, thrombocytopenia, very toxic child and all, we are all aware. But in between that, one more entity called febrile inflammatory state. This is the one thing we have not focused too much on our IAP guidelines, which is things, and it has not been focused in WHO also. Reason being is if you focus too much on this, these are the patients where misuse of an steroid will take place. That's why it has not been. Any child within a fever with an increase in acute phase reactant without any multi-system involvement, the one of the important thing is intensive monitoring for a serial monitoring of your acute phase reactant, which is required. This is a MIS-C definition. We know there are three definitions for MIS-C. One is an RCPCH definition, another is a WHO definition, another is a CDC definition. But ultimately, when you look at the fundamental principles, all these three definitions, this is a fever with the inflammatory condition. That is the thing with the multi-system involvement, ruling out the other things, and COVID antibody and antigen test. So this is a surveillance definition of a WHO, which has been published in the May 2020. So still today it is irrelevant. It is same thing has been practiced across the world. This is age is less than 19 years, presence of an involvement of a rash or a non-purulent conjunctivitis, hypotensive shock, features of myocardial dysfunction, pericarditis, valvulitis, coronary abnormality, echo findings. These are the things. And look for the coagulopathy, especially PTP, TTK, and D-dimer. Acute GI manifestation like a diarrhea, vomiting, and severe abdominal pain. That's very typical of that. Acute phase reactant like CRP, D-dimer, procalcitonin. No other obvious micromyological. That means it is a diagnosis by exclusion. Evidence for an usually COVID antibody will be positive around 85% of the time, and 10 to 15% of the time your antigen will be positive. That is the patient, whether it is severe COVID or it is a MIS-C. That's where the individual case, depending upon as a clinician, we need to look. Clinical suspicious of MIS-C, any high grade fever of more than 3 days with the epidemiological situation like this, we need to think about. If it is fitting into this clinical definition, look for if the child is in a shock and life threatening. If the child is shock and life threatening, as a clinician, what you're going to do, straight away go for, once if the shock and life threatening, you need to go for the investigation tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1 is a CBC, liver function, renal function. Apart from that, COVID antibody and PCR, you can do it. And you can go for a D-dimer, ferritin level, LDH, pro-BNP, and troponin. These are the IL-6. These are the things which is required in a case of a complete MIS-C, which life-threatening. If it is not fitting into the, which is fitting into the definition, but no life-threatening or shock-like thing, that's the time you can start with a simple test like a CBC, CRP, and COVID serology. If that becomes positive, then go for D-dimer, because it is a judicious way of using it. Pro-BNP, troponin, all those things you can do it later. That's how you can plan as a clinician. Suppose if the patient is not fitting into this, consider and send the workup for the non-MIS-C etiology. Like all the time fever with inflammatory condition doesn't mean that it is a MIS-C. We need to think about other things like malaria, where monsoon is setting in the next 15 days. We should be aware about malaria. Dengue is another thing where co-infection is likely to be. Scrub typhus is a thing. Leptospira is another thing. Scrub typhus is another thing. We should be more towards those things. If it is not fitting into MIS-C, consider alternative diagnosis, work on that. Once you diagnose the things, how do we manage a case of a MIS-C? If it is a shock and life-threatening, what is the recommended at the moment is by the international organization and WHO, even government of India guidelines is IV immunoglobulin and methylprednisolone. This is accepted by all the organization, including the Government of India and IAP. So here the slight difference is there. Dose of immunoglobulin is 2 gram per kg, that give it over a period of 24 to 48 hours. Methylprednisolone, what IAP recommends is 10 to 30 milligram per kg per day, pulse methylprednisolone for 3 to 5 days. Later you can taper it. But what Government of India guidelines recommends is 1 to 2 milligram per kg. This issue we have been discussed in a length in a task force meeting, because what majority of ID expert and intensivist and WHO and these things, finally we said, let's go within a 10 to 30 milligram of a thing, given the Government of India guidelines says 1 to 2. What Government of India guidelines says is start with 1 to 2 milligram per kg, 1 to 2 milligram, then you can cut it down. That's what the guidelines is. So aspirin, definitely it needs to be empirical antibiotic. Till you rule out any things, where you can use a clindamycin and ceftriaxone if you're suspecting a toxic shock syndrome like presentation. Otherwise, ceftriaxone alone is enough. What about aspirin? You can give an aspirin in the dose of 3 to 5 milligram per kg. If there is no response, that's the time you think about immunoglobulin, second dose, or you can go with the tocilizumab. This is the way, but whatever the literature which is available, very few people has used the tocilizumab in a patient with a MIS-C. Majority of the time it will settle down with IV immunoglobulin and steroid. What about coronary? If there is a coronary aneurysm or thrombosis or left ventricular ejection fraction is less than 35%, that's the time where your low molecular weight heparin can be used. This is an American College of Rheumatology Association's guidelines. This is the same thing has been incorporated in our national guidelines also. If there is no shock, that is the time you can go with a 2 gram per kg of an IV immunoglobulin along with the methylprednisolone of 1 to 2 milligram per kg. So this is where both Government of India, IAP, WHO, all the guidelines are synchronized with the same thing. Later you can give an steroid for 3 to 4 weeks of oral prednisolone. Aspirin, of course, we need to start with. Later up to 3 weeks, you can take it out. So if there is a bleeding, if the thrombocytopenia is there, you avoid it. If the methylprednisolone is not available, that's the time where you can think about dexamethasone also. But one thing is multi-system inflammatory syndrome requires 3 to 4 weeks of things. Let's other two things are there. Just I'll take another 5 minutes. I'll end my presentation. This is a 16-year-old boy started running fever for almost 1 month. The first week of April, and CBC was normal. Very ICRP. Very ICRP was the one thing which made the practicing pediatrician to think about febrile inflammatory status, and rest of the investigation is quite normal, and given a steroid antibiotic, still the fever was persistent, referred back. So let's review this case. This child is an adolescent, is having a fever for almost 1 month, which is unlikely after immunoglobulin and steroid. It is not really fitting into that. And no mucocutaneous involvement. Echo was normal, troponin was normal, chest and abdomen ultrasound is normal. Only terminal ileal thickening and small mesenteric lymph node was there. Vidal was positive for 1:320 days. That was ignored, thinking that it is a multi-system. So started with a suffixing child. What the message out of this case is, beware about the multi-system inflammatory mimics like enteric fever, chikungunya, falciparum, malaria, liver abscess, leptospira, scrub typhus. Don't think all the time multi-system inflammatory syndrome. Don't over-diagnosis, don't under-diagnosis. They have spend enough time in interpreting your investigation. Let's touch upon the newborn. This is my last part of my presentation. Once if the mother is a COVID positive, does it determine the mode of delivery? Mode of delivery, COVID-19 is not going to determine. It is an obstetric indication that's going to determine the mode of delivery. So COVID-19, no, because not much perinatal transmission under. What about neonatal resuscitation? Preferably, you take an adequate precaution as a pediatrician, wear in a full PPE kit and separate from the where the LSCS is taking place, from separate room, preferably in the nearby room. So you can, after adequate take precaution, you can think. What about testing in the baby? If the baby is sick, newborn is sick, immediately you can do the testing. Otherwise, you do it after 24 hours or at the time of discharge, usually 48 to 72 hours in asymptomatic. Can we allow the child to newborn to be there with the mother? Answer is yes. Unless the mother is sick, you can allow the baby to be thin, but adequate precautions, taking care of hand sanitization, mask, and maintaining the thing. So can we continue the breastfeeding? Answer is continue the breastfeeding, take an adequate respiratory hygiene. What about routine vaccination? If the child is asymptomatic, not positive and all, you can straight away go with an hepatitis B, BCG and OPV. If the child is positive, wait for 2 weeks. Later you can plan for the things if the child is asymptomatic. Discharge with the mother, and if the child is newborn is asymptomatic, mother is asymptomatic, advise the things in a home care with the intensive telephonic consultation is the thing. One more entity, what it has been seen in a less than 1 month old the newborn child is neonatal multisystem inflammatory syndrome. Yes, these are the cases is reported across the world, even in India too. But we need to be aware, we should not overdiagnose it, but interpret with the acute phase reactant, echo, cardiac enzymes, all those things interpret and things. To summarize my last 1 hour presentation is children still fare better than adults, no need to scare. So you need to be prepared, but you need not to be scared. Symptomatic care is all that is required in majority of the pediatric patients. Isolation should be with the parents preferably. If the symptoms persist, other causes needs to be ruled out apart from COVID. Steroids should be used with a caution and judiciously. You should not use the steroid left and right. So that's what in dengue management and all we've seen when the platelet count was low, people started using things to change the behavior. It took almost 2 to 3 years among the pediatricians. So the steroid is relevant, but it needs to be used judiciously. Diagnosis of a misc should be made excluding the other causes of the things. So special thanks to our IAP, National IAP Task Force Committee, which is spent almost 3 to 4 days with reviewing all the literature and all. So under Professor Piyush Gupta ji and topmost infectious disease expert across the India and top intensivist and WHO, UNICEF. So all the peoples together brainstorm the things before coming into this. That's what in this presentation I have presented. I thanks to our team, Indira Gandhi, led by our director, Dr. Sanjay KS, and medical superintendent, Dr. Naveen Benkappa, and head of the department, Dr. Prahlad Kumar, RMO Mantesh, our microbiologist Bhavana, and our PSU team, Dr. Keshav Murthy, Dr. Maaz Ahmad, Dr. Chirant, and all our staff. Thank you very much. Before ending my presentation, let's look into is the third wave is going to be a reality or is it a myth? I have discussed with both the groups at the national level. One group of an virologist where we'll say it is a reality. Reason is when you look at the susceptible population is less than once if you vaccinate more than 18 years, next group which is left is less than 18 years, it is more likely to be among that, of course, less than 1 year and 12 to 18, 19 years, that's what we are already seeing the cases. So that is one group. Another group, epidemiological point, no scientific basis for it to think about a third wave. But this debate is not relevant. What is more relevant is how do we mitigate this third wave? Taking in a social vaccine, that is COVID appropriate behavior, that is a mask, sanitization, social distance. Biological vaccine, that is the COVID vaccine, in the next targeting the population of 12 years to 19 years, that is where 12 to 18 years, that is where we can mitigate the thing. Of course, most important thing, I'm not worried about the COVID-19 in the third wave. What we are worried in the July, August month, where majority of the time, July and August, pediatrician is to face with an epidemics of infectious disease like a dengue, where a lot of routine immunization things has been disrupted in the last 1.5 years. Tickling time bomb like our TB, measles, diphtheria, where the mortality is much higher than that of COVID-19, pertussis. This is what I am more worried about than the COVID-19. Our health infrastructure, both in the public sector as well in the government sector, we need to cope up for these things. We need to gear up. Otherwise, if you lose in one child, there will be a public anger will be much higher. So that is where, as both as an healthcare provider in the government sector and the private sector, we need to gear up for those things. With this, thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'll be more happy to answer these things.
Dr. Rupashri,
Thank you
please
very
take
much,
over
sir.
for the question and answer session.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mahendra sir, for giving me this opportunity. First of all, Good evening to one and all. And first of all, I would like to thank Basuraj sir for his detailed explanation regarding critical aspects of COVID care, especially in children. Sir, I would like to inform you that your talk was much awaited, especially with the things which are going on right now. Anxiously, many of the parents are too much worried about the
Yes, proceed.
I think
What happened?
Rupashri, you are not audible.
Rupashri,
Sir, madam is facing internet issue. Please carry on, sir, from your
Okay.
side.
yeah, Dr. Professor Atta, yeah, you can unmute and ask a question. Can you unmute, madam?
Second, I'm unmuting. Yeah, I'm from Bangalore. ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೇ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೋದಿಲ್ಲಿ.
ಹೇಳಿ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಹೇಳಿ
ಹೇಳಿ.
ಸಚಿದಾನಂದ ಅವರು ಹಾಫ್ ಅನ್ ಅವರ್ 1 hour ಬ್ಯಾಕ್ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಎಂಟ್ರಿ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ ಅಂದ್ರು. ಬೇರೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಝೂಮ್ ಲಿಂಕ್ ಕೊಟ್ರು. I just entered. Okay, I'm here 1 month, totally lost from 1 month. Delivered more than 30 babies on WhatsApp video call from Karnataka. Don't ask me what. How the things are. My only question and the request is, you're speaking about third wave myth or reality. As an epidemiologist, as a public health expert or somebody working on this, we are already seeing the third wave here in Europe. So I will not say it is a myth. It is a reality. Our problem in India is nam kannadiಗರು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಬಂದಾಗ ನೋಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ. ಬಂದಾದ್ಮೇಲೆ ನೋಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ, right? My question to you as a director, I know you are already flooded with calls and questions and everything. Here, most of them are mothers, most of them are parents, they have children, they have grandchildren as doctors and everything. The use and abuse of steroids, right from the eye drops to nasal drops to oral drops, 1 day old baby putting a steroid. What is the discussion? Because on 21st of May, we are also holding an integrative pediatric conference. Every month we hold from here, from European Medical Association. And this time I called up all my speakers from last 2 days. I said, please, I want you to concentrate only on the third wave. That's why I sent the link to Dr. Sachidananda. He said, ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಜಾಯಿನ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಲಿಂಕ್ ಪೀಡಿಯಾಟ್ರಿಕ್ಸ್ ಕೋವಿಡ್ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ. I came down, but to be very, very frank to tell you, you were super fast. For me, it is like super fast. So much of information in 1 hour, doctor, so much. And it was, yes, as a doctor who are all sitting here, you are also, it's a tight thing. My only one question is, third wave is myth or a reality? That is secondary. Every June, July, and August, everybody, even as a child, I used to blow my nose, monsoon and, you know, everything. COVID is the new one which has come. But we already had summer bandaga, smallpox, chicken pox, amma bantu, you know, the neem leaves and everything was there. Then the moment you start going to the school, the rains start and we are all in the rains. And then we have this viral infections, bacterial infections, what all you can call. Also the tapeworms, also the roundworms, also the deworming, also the things, everyone. Now, as you said, that June, July, and August will be the super shot for all of us. Only I can pray as much as possible. So what would be your take on, because we have about 250 participants here, and I think doctors, the Rajiv Gandhi University, collaborating with them and bringing experts like you on a platform like this, an IT platform, bringing
nearly
experts
400,
like,
madam.
yeah.
Nearly 400. 400.
Yeah, nearly 400. Just now we are saying. Now, right now, I'm just talking 400 were there, but right now I just saw the participants 253. So now next 5 minutes, one take-home message for all of us. Forget about doctors, specialists, everything.
Can we have a brief question, please?
Yeah,
In the interest of time, can we have a brief question, please?
Just I'll give the message, madam. See, when this is not the time to debate whether it is a third wave is a reality and myth. What as a healthcare provider we need to look
Exactly.
at. June, July, August, September, October, up to November in India. This is my 25 years of experience in a pediatrics. All my work where I have done in last 25 years is all the places in a government sector, public sector. Majority of the time, each bed is occupied with 3 to 4 patients in an emergency department. This is the reality. This is without a COVID. The moment the COVID gets into your system, your healthcare system is going to collapse like anything. That's what the next 2 to 3 months is a very short window period. This is the time where it is not only the public, it is both public as well as the private sector. We need to gear up. Even though we talk about the public sector to gear up, we can issue the order, we can motivate and all those things. Ultimately, what they look into that is your investment is going to be and going to pay back. That's what ultimately it is going to be in the public sector, but as in a private sector. But in a public sector, it is not so, because we have a lot of opportunity to improve the healthcare system, both from primary healthcare center to the medical college level, where you can play a major role in improving the healthcare structure of the pediatric for the next 2 months. We're gearing up with the things. That will be my message in this presentation.
Doc, do you also
Dr.
think
Ambika
training
Harikrishna,
of the
please.
doctors?
Dr. Ambika Harikrishna, please. You can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello.
Yeah,
Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Very nice presentation, precise
Ambika, good afternoon.
and short. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I wanted to know the D-dimer cutoff for younger infants. In newborns, we are saying it is 2,500. What is your cutoff?
See,
And
basically-
use of nebulizer and HFNC, NNF says nebulizer and even HFNC, it's aerosol generating is what is being told now. So in younger infants, 3 to 4 months of age, how do we manage?
Yeah. See, this is a very, very clinical question, which is very relevant. Let us take up a D-dimer. When you are interpreting in any investigation, it is not the single investigation which is going to be useful. We need to look at multiple factors. What the clinical condition is. 2, what your acute phase reacting, what is your coagulation profile. When you're looking at the clinical condition is mild disease, even your acute phase reactant like a D-dimer, CRP and all I, but still it is fitting into the mild disease and observation category. If the cut, it is not the level of cutoff, anything above we say 750, we say it is an increase, 500 or 750, that is the time where say it is increased. Just by D-dimer alone, in the 2020, we used to say if there is anything more than 1,500, you can consider an anticoagulation therapy. That's what we used to be looked into, because the science is evolved over a period of time. It is not just acute, your D-dimer is going to determine your thrombotic things, other factors also it is going to be thing. If the severe disease, if the patient is having any coronary abnormalities, if there is any other thrombotic episodes, that is thrombotic evidence, that is the time where you'll think about a low molecular weight heparin and all. Just D-dimer alone is not going to determine the thing. It is no particular cutoff, no standardization and all. Whatever the cutoff is there, it is an arbitrary. That is one point. Second question, when it comes to the oxygen delivery devices for a less than 1 year old child, whether it is a newborn, whether it is behind 1 month, whatever it is, when you look at whether it is an HFNC, whether it is an NIV, whether it is a CPAP, all are aerosol generating procedures, aerosol generating devices. So first and foremost priority, you deliver with a nasal mask. If the patient is, if the baby is able to maintain, that's fine. Nasal flow or a simple mask. If it is not, that's the time where you'll think about a non-rebreathing mask also. If the baby maintains with that, that's good. If it is not, the best suitable thing among all these things is humidified high flow nasal cannula is the thing. Only thing is when you are entering into the ICU, you need to be in a full precautions like in a PPE and all. Even for parents also, we need to advise regarding N95 mask and all. That is where, because it is not only the doctors or healthcare provider is important, we need to take care of the attendants who are staying there also. That's where your HFNC, NIV. NIV in a less than 12 years old, whatever the interface which is available in the present thing, it is not really that much comfortable to the baby. NIV is in practical, you can say not a good option. Anything more than 12 years is a good option. But if the interface is available, it all depends upon the interface. So what is easily, which is acceptable thing is your HFNC, humidified air influence.
Dr. Rupashri, please take up questions from the chat box.
Thank you so much, and extremely sorry for the technical hitch what we faced. Anyway, thank you, Mahendra sir. Sir, there is a doctor from Dr. Avinash. Treatment protocol for ICU patient who are on ARTs and drugs, ART or DOTS.
Okay. See, one of the things we need to remember is the moment you say the patient is on ART or a steroid or in any other chemotherapy, that is an immunocompromised category. The management guidelines of what we recommend is mild, moderate, severe, critical. Here you need to look at it on an individual case basis. Even if the child within a mild disease with an immunocompromised state, that is the time where we need not wait. Even though we say remdesivir can be considered in a severe disease with hypoxia and all, even with a mild disease with the comorbidities like this, you can start with. If there is an inflammatory markers are raised along with that, then you can consider your steroid. It is only an individual case-to-case basis, not for all the things. Whereas moderate disease with immunocompromised status and all, yes. If the Regeneron is available, that is multi-cocktail therapy, a monoclonal antibody, that's not available in India at the moment. If that going to be the reality, what Cipla is going to come out with that, this is the conditions where, especially immunocompromised patient, where if you start using a monoclonal antibody in a viremic phase is first 3 to 5 days. Within that time, if you use a monoclonal cocktail antibody, that is where it is going to play. But it is the cost is the limiting factor. When you are talking about a public sector, it is not going to be the reality. If you're talking about a corporate sector where the money is not the issue, if the monoclonal antibody is there, if the cocktail monoclonal antibody, I'll go straight away with the on third day itself a monoclonal antibody. We will not wait for anything. It all depends upon the context in which you are treating the things, where you are treating it, and affordability. All those things comes into the play.
Right, sir. Right. Sir, during the course of treatment, if liver enzymes levels gets elevated, so what should be the approach for remdesivir? Should it be kept on a hold or it can be continued?
Yeah, remdesivir is the 3 situation where you need to be very careful with remdesivir. If your liver enzymes is more than 5 times, I did not discuss those things with the lack of time. 2, if the GFR is less than 30 ml per minute. Third situation is pregnancy, it is out of question in the pediatric, of course. Yes. These are the 3 situations we need to be avoided remdesivir. Fourth situation, if you use the remdesivir behind 5 days of an expected course of a time, still also your hepatotoxicity is more likely. That's why when you are using a remdesivir, it is a very, very particular period if you use it, between 5 to 10 days of a disease. If you use it behind 10 days, it is not going to be useful. Less than 5 days, it is not going to guarantee that it is going to protect a pneumonia. But coming back to the question, what is asked by doctor is, so if there is a liver function is deteriorating, can I continue with the remdesivir? My answer is no, because it is the remdesivir itself is a questionable role in a case of a COVID-19. We know that we don't have another option. That is why we are using that. If the liver function is deteriorating, I'll say no to it.
Okay. Right, sir. So another question, how to manage a patient with psychiatric problem and who is in ICU due to COVID?
See, this is the when Professor Athar is epidemiologist, when you're talking about the third wave is going to be the reality and all, this is where as an healthcare provider, we are going to face a lot of challenges. In adults, for example, if you have an ICU, if 1 or 2 nurses is there, that's good enough to take care of the things. Whereas in a pediatric, whether it is a psychiatric, whether it's a case of a developmental delay, whether it be a normal child, whatever it is. So we need to allow the parents to look into that. Ethically, how good we are. We are asking them to wear a PPE and taking care of the things. And your nurses and all is not going to be there. These are the challenges which is going to be the problem. Ideally, in this psychiatric things and all, definitely parents needs to be there with an adequate precautions and all. But ethical issues is going to be arised out of these situations. This is where the pediatric things, we are all anticipating the things.
Right, sir. Yes, sir. Related to that, there was a question like how to manage the manpower in pediatric COVID cases.
I am telling you, this is not like an adult. If the pediatric COVID goes in a full-blown things, it will create a nightmare to the healthcare system, because if there is a 1 or 2 child in the family, if they lose a 1 or 2 child which is having, that's going to give a social award to manpower, especially nursing staff and all. It is not going to take care of the things where our attendance you are allowing, then the mob, all those things is going to be the very thing we have to prepare for the third wave in a very, very aggressive.
Aggressive. Right, sir. Right, sir. So, Dr. Ganesh Kamath, he is asking, in case of MIS-C and hemodynamically stable, can we treat with IVIG in daycare or OPD basis with the daily monitoring by pediatrician, since hospitalization will be difficult in such case?
See, multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which is not in a life-threatening condition or shock. Yes, we can monitor the cardiac functions like a troponin, proBNP, D-dimer, CRP. You can start the treatment on a daycare basis. IV immunoglobulin 2 gram per kg you can start with, along with a metered prednisolone of 1 to 2 milligram per kg. So you can give it for a 3 to 5 days of an IV. Later you can switch over to the oral prednisolone. Yes, you can manage it in a daycare. It is not a difficult task. So Ganesh is asking a very practical question.
Right, sir. Right, sir. So Dr. Vasan, he wants to know if all the newborns of a COVID positive mother need RT-PCR, and if so, what are the timings and how many times should they do the test or the treatment protocol?
Yeah, as per the guidelines which has been published on April 25th by Indian Academy of Pediatrics, so we clearly says at the end of it, if the newborn is sick, you do the test immediately. No, there is no timeline. If the newborn is healthy and all, you do the test at 24 hours, both for the mother, and mother anyhow is already positive, do it for the newborn. If the test is negative, you can do it on the 48 to 72 hours, you can test. If the mother is asymptomatic, baby is also asymptomatic, no need to keep that mother as well as a newborn in the hospital. You send them to the home because we need a bed, 1, 2, continuous intensive monitoring with a telephonic consultation by a gynecologist as well as a pediatrician, along with an Anganwadi worker. That's going to be a very, very useful thing in the practice. And when the child becomes symptomatic, you can always do the test for it.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Sir, in connection to that, I have a question. Like sampling due to for this RT-PCR in newborn, should they have a special kit or sampling will be difficult?
Sampling, see, deep nasopharyngeal you can take it, or an oropharyngeal also. Only thing, the specimen you are going to use that matters. Suppose if you are using a specimen up in a bronchoalveolar lavage, that is not possible. It is around 95%. Sputum, it is around 70%. When you take in a oropharyngeal, nasopharyngeal, so the sample is going to be around, say, around 50 to 70% of the things, depending upon the day in which you select and the way in which you select. So the sensitivity will come down with the sampling and positivity. Apart from that, it is not even even the buccal mucosa can have a buccal oral things also can have a 30 to 40% of a sensitivity. It can virus can be there also.
Right, sir. Sir, a role of 2G in pediatric COVID.
See, this is a very primitive question at this stage. We know that it is a DRDO along with Reddy laboratories and all. They come out with a 2-deoxyglucose molecule. What available information I have it is basically it acts on viral replication as an adjunct rather than a treatment, where the need for oxygen and severity of the disease is going to come down. Yet the data to emerge, we don't know how the things evolve over a period of time. At the moment, I'll say no role in the pediatric age group.
Right, sir. Thank you. So another question is, how often should one should repeat indicators like IL-6 or LDH or serum ferritin, and also like CRP, LDH, how often it should be repeated?
See, this is a very practical question in the day-to-day practice. See, you need to look at the clinical condition. If the clinical condition is quite normal, role for repetition of your acute phase reactant does not arise. If the clinical condition is not making an improvement, see, when you look at an half-life of a CRP, half-life of a CRP is 12 to 24 hours. It can double at every 12 to 24 hours. That's the time where it can double it. So ideally, more practically, we can speak is around 48 hours. That's the time where you can repeat it. Otherwise, serial monitoring of an acute phase reactant not really required in the clinical practice. We need to do the things in context with the clinical practice, clinical condition.
Right, right. So another question. Gautam, do we have any hand raise option?
No, madam. No, madam.
Okay, I'll continue with the chat box. Sir.
Yes, madam.
So Dr. Apurva, she wants to know, what if RT-PCR is positive even after 14 days and patient is asymptomatic? Very rare, but
See, this is where as a clinician, we need to understand the process. That is why ICMR guidelines, which is published on the May 4th by Government of India, which clearly says there is no role for repeat RT-PCR in the clinical practice, whether it is a mild, moderate, severe, whatever the condition, it is not really required to do the RT-PCR. Because RT-PCR can be falsely positive for 3 months, not 1 or 2 days, it can be for 3 months. That means RT-PCR positivity, it is not going to reflect anything for all practical purpose. If the immunocompetent person, once he get a positive, it can be positive for 10 days. After that, even if it is positive, it is not going to be, because it's basically even dead virus can also be picked up by the RT-PCR. So what I say is clinical condition is a more important. If the asymptomatic and all, no need to worry about. There are very few indications for repeat RT-PCR. One, suppose if it is I gave an example of nephrotic syndrome, where you want to start an steroid. Before starting a steroid, you can repeat at the 10th day. Or if you want to start a chemotherapy, that's the time where you can repeat and look into that. Very few conditions where you can repeat RT-PCR can be in some sense, otherwise it is not really required.
right.
Last 3 questions, Dr. Rupashree.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. The role of anticoagulants in children.
Role of anticoagulant is very, very limited, as so even though you know it is a this COVID-19 is an inflammatory coagulopathy disorder. So very limited role of an anticoagulant. One, if there is a coronary abnormalities, if the Z score is more than 10, yes, you can use a low molecular weight heparin. Second, if there is an ejection fraction is less than 35%, where that's the situation where you can think about the thing. Severe and critical disease is another thing where you can think, or any thrombotic conditions, like in a Kawasaki disease like presentation, where your thrombotic things are there, very documented. That's the situation where this is a recommendation by American College of Rheumatology Association. Same thing has been accepted by Indian Academy of Pediatrics as well as Government of India guidelines.
Right, right. So here is a question from Mrs. Gautami. As I think in context that children are not allowed for vaccination, she wants to know, will flu vaccine will be helpful for 3.5-year child anticipating COVID third wave?
See, this is one of the things we have been much debated in 2020. One, does the influenza vaccination give a cross protectivity? Two, does the measles infection, MMR vaccination gives a cross protectivity? Does the BCG gives a cross protectivity? All these myths and theories has been scientifically has been looked into the thing. There is no evidence to say that these things is going to give a cross protection and all. So what I say is, it is don't carry with that message. Look into the immunizing within a COVID-19, provided if the whole production, everything goes up in the couple of months.
Oh, right, sir. So there is a hand raise option now, Gautam. Is there any?
Yes, madam.
Last one we will take. Shalini, please ask your question.
Yeah, sir, I have an 8-year-old kid whose RT-PCR was positive 10 days ago. On 9th day, he had 1 spike of fever.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and investigation showed counts were normal. CRP was also negative. Only D-dimer is raised, sir. How should I go about and what should I?
See, one is RT-PCR is positive. Fever is just one episode of a fever. You need to
Yes,
monitor.
sir.
We need to monitor for the fever. One, temperature monitoring is the key. If there is an increase in intensity of a temperature or continuously rising of a temperature, that's the time where I am more worried, because cytokine storm is taking place. Second situation, if your inflammatory markers, not just CRP or thing, you need to look for the other inflammatory markers also. That also we need to be watchful. I'll be more watchful rather than starting with any medication at this. I'll give a more of a symptomatic treatment with the paracetamol. I'll watch for the fever. I'll watch for the requirement of oxygen. I'll watch for the acute phase reacting. If anything is there, then only my intervention is going to be there. Otherwise, more intensive monitoring is the key. After scanning.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks, sir.
Right, sir. Sir, I'll take up this one request we have received, not a question. It is from Dr. V.C. Kapse from Buldhana, Maharashtra. He is like can we make a dedicated WhatsApp group of pediatricians to have this help and exchange the cases in future? He has given his number. We'll convey this message to Basuraj sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for answering all our questions. It was very much clear, I think. Thank you so much, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rupashri madam. Thank you.
I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor to kindly give the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Mahendra. First of all, let me congratulate Dr. Basuraj for a wonderful lecture. It was really very informative, very educative, very authoritative, and also very confident. I mean, you could handle the whole thing, all the questions also so well, and the presentation also was fantastic. What RGHS always looks for is authentic information being passed on to the doctors, healthcare workers, who are listening to these. And that's what you have done today. And generally, you have mentioned that children do well. COVID doesn't really, bother children. But at the same time, you are told you have to be watchful, not to be complacent, and we should always keep the track on the clinical signs that keep developing over a period of time. And as you know, as you very well mentioned, that COVID is a very enigmatic disease. Every day it keeps, throwing puzzles at us, and we keep unraveling those puzzles. So COVID is not yet over. We are in the midst of COVID, or rather, we are going through COVID. We have to live with it. But at the same time, we have to be cautious. And we also very clearly brought out the difference between first wave and second wave. We also brought out the difference between a pediatric case management and adult case management as well. The whole treatment management and treatment is entirely different in the pediatric case, though the drugs are the same many times. Masterly inactivity is what is practiced in pediatric mild and asymptomatic cases, whereas in adults we pump in so many drugs. We try to give them all sorts of vitamins and zinc and other things. Thank you so much, Dr. Basuraj. You have cleared the doubts of many participants today, and I'm sure many more will be there. Questions, we'll take it up. In case there are any questions that can be passed on to you, we kindly do answer that and give it to us. So we'll pass on to the people. Thank you so much. On behalf of RGHS, again, sincere my personal thanks to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sachidananda sir. It is my pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Dayanand sir, Mahendra sir, Dr. Rupashri madam, all RGHS team. Thank you, Dr. Sudarshan sir. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. In conclusion, I would like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor and Registrar for giving us this opportunity. I would like to thank the team from RGHS, Dr. Dayanand, Dr. Rupashri, Mr. Kirti, Mr. Somshekar, and all the others. I would extend a special thanks to Dr. Basuraju, who has made a very erudite presentation. It was much needed and much appreciated. I thank the participants who have come out in large numbers today to take benefit of this presentation. I would like to inform all of you that tomorrow we have a presentation by Dr. Lokesh Alahari, the WHO person. The topic is updated guidelines on home isolation and COVID care centers. I would request all of you to attend and disseminate this information amongst your colleagues and friends. Gautam, can you put up that thing? The link is also will be circulated tonight. I thank everyone once again for participating in this program. Thank you very much. Gautam, tomorrow's program, please display.
Yes, sir, it is done, sir.
Full screen, Haki.
Yes, sir.
Full screen barta illa.
Yes, sir. This is a PDF, sir.
Okay. Scroll up for the link.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Zoom 100% ಕಮ್ಮಿ ಮಾಡಿ.
Yes, sir.
ಕಮ್ಮಿ ಮಾಡಿ 80% ಮಾಡಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ.
Okay, Gautam, you can close the meeting now.
I request everyone, please fill the feedback form we shared in the chat box.
Kindly share your feedback which has been sent in the chat box. It will be very helpful to us in organizing future programs. Thank you. Gautam, you can close the meeting.
Okay.
Namaskar.